Hello, this webinar is hosted by FAU CARD as part of their PEPSA training series. CARD's mission is to provide expert consulting, training, and support at no charge for all people across all race, ethnic, and gender groups with autism and related disabilities, their families, employers, the professionals and community, and governmental agencies serving them. FAU CARD provides support and assistance with the goal of optimizing the potential of all people across all race, ethnic, and gender groups with autism and related disabilities. FAU CARD services Palm Beach County and the Treasure Coast, which includes Martin, St. Lucie, Indian River, and Okeechobee counties. There are 3 offices located at FAU's campus in Boca Raton and Indian River, in Boca Raton and Jupiter, and at Indian River State College campus in Port St. Lucie. My name is Dr. Elisa Cruz-Torres. I am a board-certified behavior analyst at the doctoral level. I am currently a visiting instructor at FAU, where I prepare pre-service and in-service professionals to work with students on the autism spectrum and maintain effective classroom management. I am also the verified course sequence coordinator for FAU's ABA program. And I also consult and coach families and professionals working with children and adolescents with autism and related disabilities. As a former middle school teacher of students with autism and emotional behavioral disorders, my passion lies in helping individuals with challenging behaviors to reach their full potential. I utilize my classroom and behavior analytic experiences to coach, mentor, and supervise students seeking their behavior analyst certification. I also consult with and coach parents, educators, and other professionals working with students with challenging behaviors to promote academic, communication, social, and independent living skills. This training is for professionals working with young children with autism spectrum disorder in an educational setting. It will include an overview of what common challenging behaviors are and why they may occur. And with an understanding of these common functions of problem behaviors, participants will also be provided with a hierarchy of strategies and procedures for preventing and addressing them in educational settings. We will begin by discussing behavior. More specifically, we'll look at what behavior actually is and how to identify or define it so that we are better equipped in promoting the appropriate behaviors and minimizing, or better yet, removing altogether the challenging ones. So to begin, I would like for you to grab a piece of paper or open up a Word document or any other electronic document on your computer or your phone. You may pause the webinar if you need to do that. Actually, I encourage you to do so as we proceed. You are going to find yourself with opportunities to reflect and engage in various topics throughout the webinar. So pausing and reflecting may help you in creating a more meaningful experience throughout this training. So we're going to begin by having you think about a student that you would like to provide more support for this year. So think about a student whose behaviors might be impacting your ability to teach, or impacting the students, whether that student or other students in the classroom, their right to learn. So think about that student, think about what they're doing that is impacting, right, your right to teach and the student's right to learn. Okay, write that behavior down, or behaviors, it can be more than one. So now we're going to, we'll be referring back to that throughout the training, as I mentioned. For now, we're gonna just talk about behavior, right? What is behavior? We need to understand what it is that we are looking at. So we need a concrete description of behavior. What is the student doing? How do we describe it to other people so that they know what is happening? And so we need to be clear, right? The first thing we want to think about is, okay, what is behavior? Well, in a very weird way, think about that if a dead person can do it, then it's not behavior, right? Dead people can't behave. What does that mean? Okay. So here's some examples of behavior, right? Exercising, talking, thinking, eating, slapping, making eye contact. These are all things that we can see, right? They can be observed by anyone and they can be measured if given the right tools, right? Essentially what's happening, the reason we can observe these behaviors is because there is some sort of contact between the individual and their environment, right? We can see it, we can observe it, we can measure it because some kind of contact is being made in the environment. Non-examples of behavior, right? These are things that a dead person can do, right? Depression, non-compliance, having some kind of attitude, like a positive attitude, aggression, anorexia. These are not behaviors because they don't make contact with the environment, right? The individual engaging in these states, right? These emotions, they are not making any sort of contact with the environment where we can observe or measure them, right? So these examples do not meet the definition of behavior. We'll talk more as we proceed. So let's go back to you. All right, I'm going to give you some examples of behavior, and I just want you to jot down, if you think A, what's being described is a behavior, is an example of a behavior, or B, it's not. You can use your presentation handout to make your guess. Okay, first, opening the school door. Is that an example of a behavior? Remember, can we observe that and can we measure it? You may, again, pause to think and then play again when you're ready. So the correct answer is yes, we can observe, we can measure. Opening the school door. How about following teachers' directions? Can we observe this? Can we measure this? Yes or no? Yes, we can. How about social skills? If you guess no, you would be correct. We cannot observe or measure social skills. Why not? Well, if I asked you to go into a classroom and observe and measure the social skills that you see, you're likely going to see lots of different skills, right, that exemplify social. So this isn't specific enough for us to observe and measure, right? Because under the category of social skills, we see lots of different behaviors. What about asking a question? Can we observe and measure somebody asking a question? Yes, we can. How about failing to respond to a question? Remember, think, can a dead man fail to respond to a question? Yes, they can. So that means it is not behavior. Not doing something is not a behavior, right? What about thinking about a question? Can a dead person think? No, they can't. So thinking is a behavior, right? Now you might be asking yourself, I can't observe thinking, right? So that doesn't meet what Dr. Cruz-Torres has been saying about observable and measurable. Well, we can actually observe and measure thinking, right? We can identify first of all, which part of the organism is interacting with the environment? The brain, right? So we can measure brain activity. We can measure if some kind of thinking processing is going on. We can observe that through the data that's collected, or the technology that's measuring the recording of the waves, brain waves, right? Knowing something is not a behavior, right? You can't measure if somebody knows something. It's private. It's something that is within and not observable, not measurable. It's not specific, and we can't really identify which part of the organism is interacting with the environment, right? To know something is not a behavior. Okay. So next steps. Again, an opportunity here for you to pause and think and jot some information down as we proceed. I want you to go back and review the behavior or the behaviors that you identified for your student that you would like to improve upon. Okay, revise that behavior or those behaviors as you see fit, now knowing that the behavior that you identified needs to be observable and measurable. So if you wrote down, the student does not listen, is non-compliant, doesn't work, right? No, that would not meet the definition of behavior, and it's going to make it difficult for you to find a replacement behavior because you can't measure not doing something. So think about how to flip that, okay? As you readjust, if you needed to, the behaviors that you identified for improvement, I want you to think about some reasons now why you think that behavior might be occurring. Okay, again, you can pause while you think about this. Jot down all of the things, right, that you feel might be causing that behavior. Okay. So now that we understand how to objectively identify behavior, we are going to move forward in understanding why behaviors might occur. This is super, super important, right? Because not only does it help us to remain objective, but it also helps us to begin the process for meeting the needs of those behaviors, right? They're engaging in those behaviors because a need is being satisfied. Additionally, remaining objective helps us to minimize that maybe the personal effect that that behavior might be having on us, right? Essentially, it minimizes us taking behaviors personally. If we're able to identify why that behavior is occurring, it has nothing to really do with us, likely, right? As educators. Oftentimes, and I've been there, we find ourselves really frustrated at a student's behavior because they emotionally charge us, or we're making assumptions about what their behavior is because we're looking at it from our lens, right? From our vantage point, making an assumption that everybody reacts or should react the way that we do, right? Or that everybody with autism behaves a certain way when, facing various situations. It happens, right? We are human beings, and making assumptions and, thinking about things in a certain way, taking things personally, it's very natural. The most important thing here is to learn, right? How can we minimize all of this personalization and be more objective in identifying why a behavior might be happening? So rather than asking, what can I do, right, to stop this disruptive behavior? We want to start thinking about the context in which the behavior is occurring and ask ourselves, why might this disruptive behavior be happening? By the way, if you wrote down disruptive behavior, you need to be very specific about your disruptive behavior. right? Because if you ask me to go into your classroom and observe, Nikki engaging in disruptive behavior and tell me how many times he or she is disruptive, I don't know exactly what you're looking for. Disruptive in your classroom might be, talking out of turn, but that might not be disruptive to me, so I may not count it. Okay, so you want to be specific about those, kind of behaviors, so that when somebody comes in and looks at the student that you're trying to assist or help, they know exactly the behaviors that you're targeting, right? Oh, there it is, called out. Oh, there it is, got out of their seat and walked around the room. Oh, there it is, tapping their pencil repeatedly on the desk. Oh, there it is, screaming, "I need help, miss." Okay. So again, asking why this behavior might be occurring or why it might be happening really can help us, in saving a lot of time and effort, right? Rather than just sort of, what can I do to do that, to reduce this disruptive behavior? Let me try this and this and this and this, and you're essentially just kind of like pulling tricks out of your toolkit. Understanding why it might be happening first is going to save you a lot of time and effort in the long run. Okay, so first we want to understand that there are reasons that are not, why behaviors occur, right? The first one, traits. Behaviors do not happen because of traits. Okay, traits are, personality characteristics that we use to describe people, right? Oh, you're so brave. They engage. They did that thing because they're super social. That they didn't do that thing because they're social. They did that thing because they got something out of it. And that's what we have to identify. What was that need? States. Why the feeling, the emotions that somebody is in is not the cause of their behavior, right? If somebody is depressed, that's not the reason they cry. They're crying because they're getting something, a need is being met from crying. Feeling hopeful, or, on the other end of things, being immoral, those states of being do not meet a need for anybody to engage in a behavior. Attitudes, right? Having an opinion about something, being annoyed, being a negative Nancy, if you will. Again, same thing. These things do not drive a need, right? For behavior to occur. Diagnosing, right? If someone has autism, is that the reason why they flap their hands? No, right? Flapping their hands meets a need, right? So behavior is caused by the person's interaction with their environment. There are stimuli or factors or variables, however you want to refer to that, in the environment causing an individual to cry or to flap their hands or to laugh. Something in the environment caused that, right? And they had a need met, right? Again, if you think about it, does every person with depression cry? No. Does every person with autism flap their hands? No, right? So these traits, these states, these attitudes, these diagnoses are not causes of behavior. Because if they were, everybody who had this feeling or this attitude or this diagnosis would behave the same way. Okay, so where do we go from here, right? So if all of this you know, these non-tangible things, right, these emotions, diagnoses, these don't, you know, cause behaviors or don't serve as a function of behavior, but the things in the environment do, what does that mean, right? What does that look like? Well, let's look at how we learn to do things, right? Let's look at some of this, some of these stimuli and environmental experiences that shape our behaviors, right? Some behaviors are learned reflexively. Some, right? As we develop as human beings, blinking, crying, sweating, shivering because of the temperature, all of those things are reflexive, right? Our bodies learn instinctively to respond to the environment, right? We blink, we have no control over that. Our body's protecting us from the dust in the environment. Crying because our body felt pain, and instinctively that's what we do, right? It's a reflex. But most behaviors are learned through history of contact with the environment, which includes people, right? As we watch others, you know, as we're growing, right, from babies, you know, infants, toddlers, we are watching the people in our environment, right? We're watching how parents respond to our cries, to our smiles, to our attempts to walk as we grow, right? Even the public is response to humans as they develop, right? You know, first steps, first words, even misbehaviors, right? We learn what is appropriate and what is not. So problem behaviors and appropriate behaviors are all learned based on how the environment responds to that behavior. So problem behaviors and appropriate behaviors, it's really important to recognize that they are learned from contact with the environment, not because we were born a certain way, or, you know, we are in a certain mood. No, we did a thing and we received something for it. And we either liked what we got and we're going to keep doing the thing, right? Or we didn't like what we got and we're going to stop doing the thing. As babies, we cry, we get the food, we're going to cry again, right? Until we learn words. Then the words get us the things that we want, right? So this goes the same for problem behaviors. If we cry in the store, right? If children are crying in the store to get something and the parent gives in, they're learning, I can cry, or I can whine, or I can say certain things, and I will get that, right? This is what I'm learning. So it's really, really important to recognize that appropriate behaviors and inappropriate behaviors are learned the same way, right? Through contact with the environment. And it's important to recognize this because it means that we can manipulate the environment to affect the change that we want in behaviors, right? Recognizing that the environment is what influences and shapes behavior allows us to better understand how we can manipulate the environment to continue to change the behavior. Behavior is lawful, right? There are many, many years of research to support that behavior is lawful in the sense that it occurs because it serves a function, right? We might not understand what that function is at first. We might not even like that behavior, right, that we're seeing. Thus, the whole purpose of this webinar, right? There is a behavior, the challenging behavior that we need to get rid of because it's impacting the educational environment. So we might not like it, but it serves a purpose for that student that is engaging in that behavior, right? All behavior, right? There is a reason for why individuals engage in it, right? Why we do what we do, as well as why they do what they do, right? We do things because it results in something we want or that we don't want. We got away from the thing we didn't want. Same for our students. Okay, so we need to step back and ask ourselves, what is the function of this behavior? Why are they doing what they are doing? If we can identify that, then we can help them get that need met, right? But for engaging in a more appropriate behavior. So think about it for a second, right? Why do you think people do what they do? Why do you do what you do? Right? Maybe think about, again, that your last activity prompt was to think about why that student might be engaging in that challenging behavior that you've identified. Essentially, behaviors are typically maintained by one of the following. The first is attention, right? Attention functions can be adaptive or maladaptive, depending on the context. Meaning, people will engage in whatever behavior has gotten attention if that's what they want, right? We all want attention. We're human beings. We want some kind of attention in some way, shape, or form. Some people want more attention than others, right? That's neither here nor there. Just understanding that, attention-seeking behaviors is something that's inherent in all of us. Think about, some positions in life, right? So there's some work where having attention is, a key component of being successful. So politicians, public speaking, servers in a restaurant, actors, actresses, right? They all have jobs which, attention from others is a critical opponent, right? There's tons more, right? But when we're talking about maladaptive behaviors or challenging behaviors that serve for attention, right, we need to be cognizant of that need, right? So, for example, if you think about a behavior maybe that you would describe as self-injurious, aggressive, what does aggressive look like? Well, how is that student be aggressive? Or, destroying property, right? Those behaviors could be engaged in for attention from others, because typically we are, or somebody is responding to those behaviors. If a student is destroying property, if a student is injuring themselves, if a student is being physically aggressive in some way, shape, or form, either to themselves or to others, someone is likely to come in and try to stop them, right? And in doing that, that individual is getting some sort of attention. So even though, right, we need to come in and intervene, especially, depending on the gravity and the level of, these very disruptive behaviors, for safety reasons, we have to think that if that behavior is functioning for attention, how are we going to minimize the kind of attention we're giving during the responding, right, to this safety situation? And then how can we teach them to get attention in a healthier, safer, more appropriate way? The second function is tangibles. So here's where behavior is occurring because the individual is getting something that they want. It can be an actual item, it could be a food, it could be a toy, an activity, right? They're gaining access to something that is desirable. What do you think, for most of us adults watching this training, what do you think the most influential tangible is for us in our lives? If you said money, you're probably right, right? Receiving money keeps us working, right? So it allows us to get things, you know, live in homes, whatever, right? But the receipt of money motivates us, keeps us, it reinforces what we're doing and keeps us doing what we're doing so that we can keep receiving that, right? That's a tangible item. In the educational setting, a system like a token economy works very much in the same way. So, you know, maybe you provide stickers or points or moving on, you know, of levels or other arbitrary objects that are later exchanged for toys or desirable things, right? When you're delivering those tokens in whatever form they are for appropriate behavior. Same thing, these are tangibles. But tangibles can produce unwanted effects as well. So when a parent gives a child candy, right, in order to stop a tantrum, the parent is risking reinforcing or teaching that child, if you tantrum, I give you what you want. You want this candy, I'm going to give it to you when you tantrum. Or you know, and when random unexpected wins reinforce gambling behavior, right? To the extent that the gambling continues even when the person is facing bankruptcy, you know, draining their bank account, whatever, you know, because they will receive, right, that reward if they continue at some point, right? That the money that they get from gambling and unknowing when it's going to happen, the randomness of it keeps it strong, keeps that behavior strong, right? That's tangible reinforcement that is in effect. The next one is with regards to escape or avoidance. Here's where, you know, if a behavior results in the removal of something from the environment, then that behavior is functioning for escape or avoidance, right? That individual engaged in something to avoid or escape something that was aversive, something they didn't like. They got away from it or they avoided it altogether. Again, this can be appropriate or adaptive or inappropriate or maladaptive. It depends on the context. For example, if we think about our cars, right? Most cars now, there's you know, newer cars, if there's a safety feature, right? If you don't buckle your seatbelt within a certain time, you get a beeping, right? So if that beeping sound is aversive to somebody, they're going to put their seatbelt on to avoid hearing that beeping sound, or the car essentially yelling at them. This is what I say. My car's yelling at me, stop yelling at me, and I'll put it on. So again, then, you know, if you find that sound aversive, then likely you're going to very quickly put it on, right, to escape that sound. Or as soon as you get in the car, you're going to put it on to even avoid hearing that sound altogether, right? Looking at it medically, you know, medical professionals, right? They're largely tasked with removing aversive stimuli from their patient's environment, right? When a medic stops heart attacks or, you know, traumatic bleeding, you could say that the removal of those events means that they've done their job. Maladaptive behaviors also function for escape, right? For example, children at school, they may tantrum during certain activities that lead to the teacher removing them from the classroom or putting them in timeout, right? So although the timeout is intended to function as a punisher, right? You're going to timeout, removing you from this situation. It may function as a reinforcer for that, tantrum, because maybe that's what they wanted. They've learned, if I engage in this tantrum right now, I get away from this task. I don't want to do it for whatever reason, right? Too hard, whatever. But if they've learned, I can make this noise or do this thing, engage in this action, and the teacher removes me from the classroom or puts me in timeout, I don't have to do the work. Yay me, right? That's why I engaged in this behavior. That was the function of that. And then finally, there are also behaviors in which the reinforcing function, right, the reason why that behavior occurs is tied to sensory, right, to our sensory receptors. Feelings of endorphins that are released from exercise, right? A runner's high, if you will. That's a classic example of a sensory, need being met after engaging in a behavior. Or my favorite, feeling relaxed, right? During a massage and enjoying how my body feels after a massage, and my muscles, loosened, more relaxed. If that's the need, right, I will go get more massages because I want that, right? I want that thing, that feeling afterwards. But automatically reinforcing behaviors, right, that we can deliver to ourselves can also have adverse effects. For example, sensations that come from sex or drugs, these can lead to, serious addictions or really, unfortunate circumstances or consequences. Children with autism, seen, when they wave their fingers in front of their faces for hours, right? They may just be receiving that visual stimulation that arises from within, right? So the behaviors that serve for automatic reinforcement or this sort of sensory fulfillment, it comes from within. It's internal. They don't need to be delivered by anybody in the external environment. They're being delivered within one's own body, right? In the real world, behavior often has multiple functions, right? For example, escaping a situation might also be functioning for attention, right? Depending on what happens, right, after escaping the situation. So there is likely, situations where behaviors are serving multiple functions. But for this webinar, we're just going to tackle, and we're just going to focus on functions of behavior individually. Excuse me. One caveat that we want to address is medical, right? If we see behaviors all of a sudden, right, pop up out of nowhere, out of the blue, like this is new behavior and it's very disruptive, it's very challenging, it's problematic, we want to rule out medical first, especially those behaviors, right? There could be some sort of medical issue happening that's causing some sort of discomfort, that individual is, trying to escape, right, this pain. So for example, a student who all of a sudden, starts hitting the side of his or her head. They never did this before, and now they're hitting it really hard. If that student doesn't have the capacity, their ability yet to communicate in any way, shape, or form that they're hurting, right? They have a headache or an earache or infection or something, then they're engaging in automatically reinforcing behaviors to try to escape that pain. So we want to be really cautious of this, right? We want to pay attention to this, especially when we are working with students with autism that don't have an effective communication system, right? Our students that don't have vocal capacity, or they do, but it's not functional in any way. They're, they echo or they script, or they have not yet learned how to identify feelings and emotions, and don't have, a functional communication system. Those students, especially, until they learn how to identify and share what they're feeling and point to what's happening, they can and likely do engage in very problematic self-injurious behaviors as a form of trying to alleviate the pain in their bodies, right? So we want to consider, this especially when we're talking about, students, again, that had, all of a sudden behaviors to consider, right? So perhaps maybe that student that you identified earlier is concerning because you hadn't seen that behavior before. That might be where you start. Okay. Let's see here. Okay, so we're going to go through some examples, right? Just a couple examples here. Again, this is a pause and reflect, if you will. I'm going to give you a scenario, and you write, do you think that this is you're able to identify the function of the behavior based on what's stated? Okay, yes or no. So Laura yelled at the teacher because she is bored in class, right? Is being bored in class a function of yelling at the teacher? It is not. It is an emotion. It is a state of being, right? If everybody who's bored, if this was to be true, right, and being bored functioned as for yelling, then that would be the case for everybody, right? Lewis rips his worksheet because the teacher sends him to the office. If you said yes, correct, right? We can't observe and measure boredom. We can observe and measure a teacher sending a student to the office. We can see that happen repeatedly, and we can measure it. And if it happens every time he rips his worksheet, and that's the result, right? That's the consequence. That's what happens. We can start deducing here why, or hypothesizing why he's ripping his worksheet. Melissa rubs her temples because she has a headache. Yes, good. Right? This is likely escape, maybe even avoidance, right? If in the past, a headache signals that something worse is about to happen, right? A migraine, I'm gonna have to lay down, not gonna be able to complete all of these obligations that I have, right? So it could be escape and or avoidance. Melissa's engaging in a behavior, rubbing her temples, to alleviate the pain that the headache has brought. Okay, so we are now going to get into the next phase, right? How do we understand now why, right? We understand why. There are some basic reasons why behaviors occur, but how do we understand why this particular person's behavior is happening? Why are they engaging in that behavior? How do we determine the function for them, right? We're going to start by watching a very brief video, and it includes a scenario of students in a classroom and how the teacher responds, and just to give us an idea of, you know, why behavior might be happening, and then we'll pick up after.
We are going to discuss ABCs: antecedents, behavior, and consequences. This will help us analyze behavior so that we can make positive behavioral changes for our students. Let's begin with a definition. Antecedent, anything that comes before behavior. Behavior, observable and measurable. Consequence, anything that comes after a behavior. Way to go, Johnny. That is the right answer.
She's always talking to him. He's always right. Yeah, well, I think life is stupid. Watch what I'm going to do. I'll get you, Mr. Smarty Pants.
Why did you do that?
You cannot hit people at school. You should know better. Go see the principal now.
I'm having a great day, Mr. Jenkins. I just wanted to say hi.
Great, you're back. Just in time for art and recess. Let's think about what just happened. Did Millie get what she wanted? Was her behavior effective? And what can I do differently next time to help Millie before there is a problem?
Okay, so as you reflect on that, I will refer back to it as we continue throughout the ABC analysis, but just think about the thoughts that were going through the young girl's in her mind, and what overt behaviors she was engaging in that whole situation. So we're actually at a point here before I continue, where we're going to pause, and this is where we need to do a check-in. So thank you for participating in this webinar. To obtain a certificate of completion, you must fill out the form at the certificate of completion link provided in the email for this training. You will need to write a code down, as it will be required to receive the certificate. So here is your code, ladies and gentlemen. It is DEC, as in December, DEC 100220. Again, the code is DEC 100220. Okay, so ABC analysis, what is it? We've been talking about behaviors a lot. We've been talking about why they might happen, right? And so now we're going to sort of put it all together. So the behavior is anything that the individual or student, in this case, is saying or doing. The antecedent is the event or the stimulus that was presented right before that behavior. And then the consequence is the event or the stimulus that was added or removed right after that behavior. So it is really important to consider that what we call here a contingency, this ABC sequence, is very timely, right? Things are happening very contiguously. The antecedent, right? Here is all of those environmental factors, those conditions that are preceding that target behavior, right? What is in the setting? What did the setting look like? What did it feel like? What was going on in the environment? Was there any activity happening or no activity happening? What was the time of the day? That could be a factor as well. Who were the people in the environment? Right? These antecedents signal or cue the behavior. They allow the individual to to recognize that I can engage in this behavior based on these things that are happening right now, right? Behaviors can be influenced by motivation, which would be part of this antecedent, right? These are things that are preceding the target behavior. Or deprivation, right? Like I want something or I want to get away from something and it's in this environment already. Okay. These could be demands, requests that are presented, just like tasks, right? This can be transitions, right? In the classroom from one space to another. This could be somebody said no, right? Or a denial of some sort of a request. This could be an alone, right? There's nothing happening, right? There's this environment is deprived. There's a state of deprivation in this environment. Is there always an antecedent? Yes, there is. Sometimes it isn't always easy to identify, right? For example, self-stimulatory behaviors, right? These are the behaviors that many of our students on the spectrum may engage in for themselves, right? To gain something or get away from something, whatever, but they're using their own bodies. We may not see the antecedent, right? Because it's self-stimulatory. But we can still analyze it, right? So when we're trying to identify the antecedents, we consider some these questions, right? So where does the behavior happen? When does it happen? What activity, again, is happening, or occurring, when that behavior happens? With whom is the behavior occurring with? What are the other students doing when the problem behavior is beginning? What are the other teachers or adults doing in that environment when the behavior begins? In the classroom, there are also other possible contributing factors that we want to consider, right? Specific staff in the environment, the proximity of the adults to the child, as well as the proximity of other children to the child. That could be a factor. The noise level, the number of individuals in this space, other factors such as lighting, the door being open or closed, hallway noise, all of those things, right? Those are things we can control, right? There are other factors that we may not be able to control, such as medication change that may have happened, other variables that are happening at the home or within the family. There are new family members in the home, or living situations have changed, divorce, birth, those kinds of things, as well as health, right? We can't control those things, but we can control the setting of our classroom. So, why is it important to understand antecedents? It's how we control behavior. It's how we prevent behaviors from happening. It allows us to predict when the behavior may occur, because then if we can make those predictions, we can change the antecedents to change the behavior. So now that we understand, that we can control or manipulate the stimuli in the environment to then help us control behavior, right, or influence it rather, we're going to look at some strategies here that are minimally intrusive, right? These are things that you may be able to control in your classroom, and they may not just be beneficial for your student that you're targeting, but they might be beneficial for many of your students in your classroom, if not all of them. So we want to look at creating a comfortable classroom, right? Think about all of the ways that we accommodate ourselves when we need to be productive. or when we need to feel safe, or when we need to get comfortable, right? How many of us adjust the lighting? Or how many of us, like myself, add some music or sit in a very specific position on the couch or in a very particular chair, just to, again, make ourselves comfortable. Most of us could, will probably agree that we need to make adjustments in our environment to help us achieve certain goals, right? Our students are no different. We all have our idiosyncrasies that need to be accommodated, and our students on the spectrum do as well. So before I identify some suggestions for creating a comfortable classroom, I want to address a common concern that is often shared, right, when talking about environmental planning. So it might sound something like, well, if I do this for this student, then it's not fair to the other students. Or if I do this for him or her, then I'm not helping them, function in the real world. The issue with these concerns is that they're based on faulty thoughts, right? Assumptions, right? That only that particular student is going to benefit from the adjustments, or that by forcing a student to adjust to how things are, right, and not providing accommodations, it's going to make them stronger. Because in the real world, there are no accommodations for students in the environments that they need to face in the future. We want to be careful about making assumptions when we are attempting to make changes, especially when we're trying to address sensory difficulties. Sensory needs can be very easily alleviated, and again, with very minimal intrusiveness. So if a student has an environmental need that he or she will need to address when they're adults, then providing them with the skills needed to advocate for themselves and seek support for those needs can begin in the classroom, right? It can begin in your classroom. So exposing them to various types of supports can actually be really instrumental in their ability to cope with their sensory difficulties and help them understand what strategies may work best for them. So this can also help them to better understand what type of work and work environments are going to be best suited for them, right? So you're building these foundational advocacy skills. So lighting, right? Classroom lighting is probably one of the easiest and quickest things that can be changed, right? You can flip the switch, right? Use only half of the classroom lights. When you're using an overhead projector or an LCD projector, turning off more lights will cut down on how much, the brightness, but also you may be cutting down on some background noise that might be associated with that type of lighting that might not be disruptive to us because we're not, so sensitive to some of the buzzing of the lights, but it may be to some of our students. Bring in some more natural light, opening classroom shades, blinds, letting the sun come in, right? If that's an option for you. Sometimes there's concerns that the student's going to be distracted or staring out the room. If that's the case, adjust the layout of your classroom so that the students' backs are to the window. Mixing it up, right? Using different types of lamps, right? Using floor lamps or desk lamps in lieu of the classroom lights, which are often fairly bright. This can make a world of a difference. Of course, you need to be cognizant of potential, hazardous things like wires and stuff like that. Having exposed cords, so you want to be cautious of that. Christmas lights, as shown here with, if you can see the desk lamps there as well. This is a nice popular option. It's, not only used to, make the classroom more comfortable, but it can be used for a prompt for students, right? So Christmas lights are on only during group work or independent workstations. You can make individual adaptations, right? If making classroom-wide changes seems unwarranted, then maybe allow individual students access to sunglasses or baseball caps in the classroom, right? Things that limit those direct effects of those fluorescent lights. Using, noise canceling headphones, right, to block the humming of the fluorescent lights. So when we're talking about sounds, right, similar to changes for lighting, making some changes for adjusting the sounds and noise level in your classroom can be pretty simple. Moving the student might be the easiest solution, right? Survey, observe, watch. If you notice a relationship between a particular sound and a student's behavior, make a move, right? What if the student that they're sitting next to, right, their neighbor hums while they work or very lightly taps their pencil, and then your student is, responding in an inappropriate behavior to that subtle sound? Move them, right? Where a student sits should be fluid and flexible and based on their needs. Consider your own volume in the classroom. Many students don't respond to loud voices or yelling, right? So in this case, the volume is in your control. And it might take practice, but it can make all of the difference. As previously shared, using noise reduction headphones or earplugs could be a simple, affordable option, but those things need to be available and accessible, right? You want to teach your students how to access those things, those tools, based on their needs, right? So teaching rules, expectations for using expensive equipment. But in addition, you're also, again, teaching these advocacy skills for students. They're learning that they can use these tools to minimize noise. You can consider using soothing background noises, humming, a noise machine, calming music, lots of options there. Also, you can prepare your students, right? Keep them in the loop. If there's an activity that you're going to be doing that is particularly difficult, experiments, celebrations, assemblies, let your students know, right, what is coming, prepare them. This can be really helpful for alleviating anxiety and promoting preparedness, right, for these activities. And you may, you can use a social story or a social narrative to help them, get prepared. Similar to, the sensitivities to light and sound, individuals with autism may also be sensitive to smells. So addressing smells in the classroom, can be challenging, right? Pinpointing the actual smell, but, perfumes and deodorants, limiting the use of those, cleaning solutions, if they're really strong, speaking with administration about the use of, specific tools or scents, right, from the custodial staff. Food, if you keep food in a airtight container, you're limiting how, the smells from being emitted. Also, you're saving your food. Unscented markers, those kinds of things. If there's a smell of mold or mildew, reporting those can be helpful. And, temperature, right? Temperature can be problematic. If we think about ourselves, again, we're in a situation where it's really, really hot or really, really cold, that affects our productivity. Same with our students, regardless of disability, right? A classroom that's too warm or too cold is, going to lead to discomfort. And it's going to make focusing very difficult, right, for students. So if you can adjust the temperature, you're able to do that. But you may have a student that has very specific needs. So, if they need to wear a sweatshirt, even when it's warm outside, consult with their parents and make sure that that's okay, that it works for them. But, you may need to consider having sweatshirts or, other backup clothing for your students. So, these are some strategies for proactively addressing those sensory needs, right, to minimize problem behaviors that are related to discomfort. We're going to revisit antecedent strategies a little later. for now, we're going to switch gears and we're going to continue with actually the ABC analysis and look at consequences, right? These are the changes that happen after the behavior occurs, right? So the behavior occurs and what happens after? Is the request repeated? Is their behavior ignored? Is attention provided in some way, shape, or form? Are they given access to something? Are they taken away, right? Is the activity or whatever removed? So there are two types of reinforcement, or excuse me, two types of consequences, and we are going to talk about both of these, right? Reinforcement and punishment. We're going to talk about these in detail because they often get confused or misunderstood rather, and it's really, really important to review these because they are extremely powerful in shaping behavior. So reinforcement, excuse me. Reinforcement, by definition, increases the likelihood of behavior occurring in the future. That means something occurred after that behavior, and that behavior keeps occurring, right? Or it happens more in the future, so long as that thing that happened after, right? That consequence continues to happen. So we have positive reinforcement, and here the positive just means addition, right? It's not qualitative. It's not like the kind of thing, right? It is just addition, right? So think of it as a plus sign. So something was added, right? The behavior occurred and then something was added and that behavior continued to occur in the future. If something was removed from the environment, right? So that means something had already been there. That behavior occurs if that thing was removed and the behavior to occur in the future. Negative reinforcement has happened. Again, this is quantity, addition and subtraction. Something was added, the behavior keeps happening in the future. Something was removed, the behavior keeps happening in the future. Negative reinforcement is not punishment, right? Because punishment reduces behavior from happening. Negative reinforcement keeps the behavior happening. Something was removed, but that behavior is still going to happen in the future, so long as that thing gets removed. So some examples here of positive reinforcement. If Tom's behavior is, I need help, and the staff member responds, if in the future there's an increase in this behavior in similar situations, then reinforcement has occurred. What was added was the staff member's response. David screams, that's the behavior. Staff rush to David, right? So what was added? The staff, right? Rushing to his attention, to give him attention. If in the future, David screams, right? In similar situations and staff continues to run to him, this is positive reinforcement, right? Both consequences are the addition of what? Attention or assistance and what, but they are potentially reinforcing. As you can see, one of the behaviors, asking for help or requesting help, is appropriate. Screaming, not appropriate, but the consequences are still reinforcing those behaviors, appropriate or not. Negative reinforcement. The behavior here, Samantha says, I need a break. If classwork is removed, right? And in the future, Samantha asks for a break during classwork and classwork is removed, then negative reinforcement has occurred, right? This is the subtraction here. The behavior is that I need a break, appropriate request. The removal, the subtraction of the classwork is the negative. Amy yells profanities in the noisy classroom. The staff take Amy out of the cafeteria. or should say classroom, excuse me. If in the future there's an increase that she's going to yell profanities to get out of the classroom, then reinforcement has occurred. I'm yelling, I'm getting removed from this classroom, I'm going to keep yelling to get removed from this classroom. Amy's yelling is being reinforced by the removal of the noisy classroom. Okay, so that is negative reinforcement. Let's do a little practice here. Eli is a student in Mrs. C's math class. On various occasions, Mrs. C sees him working immediately. Sometimes she says, "Nice job getting started so quickly." Sometimes she says, "You were awesome." Sometimes she marks a smiley face on his worksheet. So yes or no? Are these responses by Mrs. C antecedents? Pause and reflect. If you said no, you're correct. They did not happen before Eli started working. Are they consequences? Yes, they are, because they happened after the behavior, right? Him working immediately. Are they reinforcers? We have to say no at this point because we don't know if Eli continues to work immediately. We will only know if the praise and the smiley face are reinforcing for him if he continues to begin working immediately and she delivers these consequences. So when we talk about reinforcement, there are some ideas here that we want to review, right? Reinforcement, positive or negative, is always defined by the future frequency of the behavior. The effect of reinforcement is that there is an increase in that behavior happening in the future, right? It can be the behavior continues happening in the future, or there can be an increase, right? It's what we want to keep seeing. When we are using reinforcement as a procedure, we are reinforcing behaviors or responses. We're not reinforcing people. Okay, remember the contingency, the connection, the pairing. It's the behavior followed by our delivery of reinforcement, because that's the behavior we want to keep seeing ideally, right? We're not reinforcing the individual and letting them know that you are getting what you want for doing this thing. It is also a description, right? Reinforcement doesn't cause behaviors to happen, right? It's not an explanation. There's no causal effect here. It just simply describes how behavior can be shaped to continue or not. And basically, reinforcement continues behavior, right? It shapes it, right? If we look at the effect, the definition is that that behavior either maintains or increases in the future through reinforcement. It is a consequence. Therefore, it happens always after the behavior, right? So the reinforcement that we're either adding or removing from the environment occurs, right? That we're changing the environment, but it occurs after the response. And finally, there is a contingency. There's a process here between that response and the consequence. And it must be immediate, right? That consequence, that reinforcement is contingent on the behavior happening, and it's immediate. As soon as possible, we deliver the reinforcement. If we delay too long, the chances increase that other behaviors are going to happen, and then we may reinforce other behaviors by the time we deliver it. We want to deliver immediately the reinforcement to the student as soon as the behavior that we want happens. So again, positive reinforcement is an addition. So it teaches us how to get things. Negative reinforcement is a removal, it's a subtraction. So it teaches us how to get away from things. It teaches us how to escape and avoid situations that are undesirable. Again, consequences don't cause behaviors to happen. They shape the frequency of behavior and occurring. So understanding this is really, really critical for tackling challenging behaviors, because it allows us to recognize that we have power in not only reducing the problem behavior, but in replacing the problem behavior with more appropriate behavior that we want to see. And then this appropriate behavior is not only what we want to see, because it's going to help our classroom function better, but it's in the long run going to help our student. It's more beneficial for our student. So it's potentially life-altering for them to learn an appropriate behavior so they can continue being reinforced even when they leave our classroom. So what if a problem behavior has been in place for however long, it's been reinforced, and we now recognize, that behavior has been functioning for attention. They've been getting attention for it. Darn it. We don't want to do that anymore. We're reinforcing it, right? It keeps happening because we're feeding the function. So we're not going to reinforce it anymore. This is called extinction, right? This procedure of no longer reinforcing a previously reinforced behavior, right? We're not delivering reinforcement for, in this case, an inappropriate behavior anymore. We're putting it on extinction, no more, right? This is called extinction, because what eventually is going to happen is that problem behavior is going to be extinguished. It's not getting what the need is, right? The function isn't being met anymore. So it will be extinguished. Some examples of this. Each time Louis is presented with a math assignment, he screams. In the past, staff would instead allow him to read in the Nook, right? Extra time. Now, they don't allow him extra time to read at the Nook. Over several weeks, the screaming is less, and eventually he stops. During lunchtime, Nikki always asks for extra food, which wasn't healthy for her. If staff did not give her the extra food, she would throw a tantrum, and then the staff eventually gave her requested food. However, now the staff no longer gives her food for tantruming. Over several lunches, the tantrums have decreased. So this is extinction. No longer reinforcing previously reinforced behaviors, whether the previously reinforced behaviors were appropriate behaviors or inappropriate maladaptive behaviors. So we need to be prepared, because when a behavior has previously been reinforced and now is no longer reinforced, it will get worse before it actually gets better and eventually stops happening. This is a very natural process and absolutely must be expected and prepared for, right? If we can think about ourselves when we're at elevators, right? And we press the elevator button and it's taking a little longer than usual, right? We're like, wait a minute, it's been 5 minutes. This is a very long time to wait for the elevator to come. Normally, we press the button and the elevator comes within a minute or so. That's how we get reinforced for pressing the button of the elevator. But now it's not coming. What are we likely to do? Press it again and again. Even though it's, green, it's pressed, we're probably going to press it more, probably multiple times, just to make sure, right? Same with like a vending machine. If we go to a vending machine daily, put money in, and we always get what we want, and then one day we put money in and nothing happens. Our money's in there, I'm pressing the button like I've always done, I've always gotten what I wanted, but not today. What are we likely to do? Press harder, maybe even shake the machine, because we're always reinforced. Why isn't it happening now? So it's the same logic, right? If a student has been reinforced for a long time, especially, it's much more difficult when you have longer established behaviors. When extinction procedures are in place, you are likely to see an increase in how many times, right? The frequency of that problem behavior, how long they're engaging in it, right? The duration of it, the intensity of it, because it's like, hey, I was engaging in this behavior before and I was always getting what I wanted. What is happening? Why am I not getting what I want? Let me try it more. Let me try it longer. Let me try it harder. Okay, so we have to consider this before using extinction procedures. Switching gears to punishment. So it's the opposite, right? When we deliver punishment after a behavior, punishment decreases the likelihood of that behavior from occurring in the future. We want to talk about punishment because most of us, without knowledge and training, rely on punishment to control behaviors of children. And we really want to talk about what true punishment is and what the effects are. So just like with reinforcement, it's, again, we are adding or taking something away after the behavior occurs. If we add something after the behavior occurs, it's positive, right? Addition. And if the behavior in the future decreases or stops altogether, it's been punished. If something is removed from the environment, right, subtracted, taken away, then, and in the future that behavior stops or, reduces, then negative punishment has occurred. Behaviors should not initially increase when you're using punishment. And if you're using punishment procedures, those behaviors should decrease relatively quickly. So let's look at some examples. Matthew hits a staff member. A teacher reprimands him. So something's being added, right? There's a positive. If in the future he hits the staff member less often, then that reprimand served as a positive punisher. If Sue appropriately requests a break from her speech therapist and the speech therapist yells, "Stop asking me for a break," if Sue's requesting decreases in the future in that therapist's presence, then positive punishment has occurred. Both situations, something was added that led to that behavior decreasing in the future. Negative examples. Chris refuses to complete his assignment. That is followed by a removal of access to computer games. If in the future, refusing to complete assignments decreases, then it's been punished negatively because the computer game being taken away, right, is the negative, and then that behavior decreased in the future. Sarah, who works for tokens, begins to hit her head when work is presented. The teacher removes a token that she earned for every time she hits her head. If the head hitting decreases, then taking away the tokens was a negative punisher. So you can see how these, all of these procedures of reinforcement and punishment serve for both increasing and decreasing appropriate and inappropriate behaviors. But there are some side effects with punishment that we need to consider. There are emotional and aggressive reactions typically associated, right? These are natural human instincts, right? To react emotionally or aggressively. We students, people, right? We want to protect ourselves. And when something aversive is added or taken away, something's taken away that we want, there's a likelihood of a reaction to that. The student may just engage in avoidance behaviors, right? They may just avoid the person who's delivering punishment and all the punishers. But what's happening here, right? Have they learned, the lesson? No. If they haven't learned an appropriate behavior and instead they're just learning to avoid that person who's delivering the punishment, they're still probably going to engage in the problem behavior, right? It's somewhere else with somebody else. You may also see a decrease in one setting with, the problem behavior where the punishment is being delivered, but then you may see an increase in another setting or with another person. We call that contrast effects. And especially, again, if they haven't learned the appropriate behavior to get the need met. And then, as we discussed earlier, right, we talked a lot about watching others, right, as we develop as children. So children being subjected to punishment, especially, if they're not being reinforced at all for appropriate behaviors, they're more likely to continue this cycle when they engage with other people. So here you have some unfortunate negative modeling. Okay. So here is where we want to make sure that we understand the differences here. So reinforcement or punishment, pause and reflect, think and guess. Oh. Sending a student to the office because she was talking in class led to an increase of talking in class. If you said reinforcement, you're correct, right? Increase in behavior. Taking aspirin to get rid of a headache resulted in an increase of taking aspirin when a headache arises. Increase in behavior. Reinforcement. Boy pulls the hair of the girl sitting in front of him. This is actually neither. We don't have enough information regarding what happened to the future frequency of pulling hair. So how could, pulling hair in that example be punished if we want that behavior to stop, right? Maybe he gets in trouble and that the consequence of getting in trouble is something he doesn't want, so he's going to stop pulling hair. Or he's pulling the hair and the girl starts to ignore him. She doesn't respond, and that's what he's looking for. He stops pulling hair, right? If she gives attention and he continues pulling her hair, her attention now serves as reinforcement, right? So we got to look at the contingencies and the future frequency of that behavior. Okay. So you can pause here and revisit your target student behavior. Review the behaviors that you identified and write down some possible reinforcers for maintaining that might be maintaining those behaviors, right? Those challenging behaviors. Why are they continuing to engage in them? And let's just talk about some consequence strategies. Again, when we want to really focus on reinforcement, right? Because reinforcement is going to promote the behaviors that we want. So we need to teach a replacement skill or a replacement behavior. We understand what the function of that behavior might be. So if it's to access an item, to get attention, whatever it is, let's find the appropriate way for them to engage in accessing that, right? And teach it to them. And then as they are learning it or demonstrating it or practicing it, we have to reinforce that target behavior, the replacement behavior, right? We're putting the problem behaviors on extinction, right? We're not giving attention for calling out anymore. We're only giving attention for raising hand. We're no longer sending him out to the principal's office or timeout for repeatedly engaging in a disruptive behavior that isn't dangerous, but we're reinforcing the replacement behavior for that. And you may want to use a reinforcer survey to assess interest. We don't want to assume that all children really are motivated by stickers or even just praise or candy, right? Don't make the assumption that things that we like our children like. Ask the parents, directly ask your student if, they have the capacity to answer those things. Really find things that you that are going to motivate them. And also, prioritize the behaviors, right? Discipline problems need to be remedied, right? We're not going to ignore these specific behaviors, but you want to identify what disruptive behaviors are, right? This, right, student behavior that interferes with the teaching act, interferes with the rights of others to learn, is psychologically or physically unsafe, or destroys property. These are discipline issues that have an adverse impact on learning and are going to require more extensive, solving, right, planning, and they all still serve a function, right? We still need to identify why they're happening, and we still need to identify a replacement behavior that meets that function, right? Escape, avoidance, attention, access, whatever, automatic. But they're, depending on how problematic they are, they may need to be addressed more specifically. So I'm going to skip ahead here for sake of time. There is a lot of research that has been done with regards to using applied behavior analysis in the educational setting. So far, all of the strategies, the concepts that I've been sharing are all rooted in applied behavior analysis, or ABA. Yeah, it started in the laboratory testing animals, but as it evolved, it actually became the methodology that was used to create solid educational foundations, right? The behavioral approaches that were used to design curriculum, which is sequenced set of tasks, repeated repetitive practice, providing opportunities for students to engage in, appropriate behaviors, using procedures such as prompting or feedback to reinforce and establish those behaviors that we want. Monitoring, performance monitoring, all of those things in curriculum design came from ABA. The instructional methods that are often used, such as token economies, discrete trials, those are all rooted in ABA. Classroom management, right? Rules, procedures, consequences. Those consequences, for engaging in appropriate behaviors, your reward system. Consequences for negative behaviors, right? Your punishment system. Those are all rooted in ABA. And then, right, the whole goal is that we want to have our students take what they've learned in the classroom and apply it to the outside. So, as I just mentioned, when we're talking now about positive behavior support systems that are now really prominent in most school cultures, right? A school-wide behavior support system, we're looking at addressing problem behaviors based on their functions, right? We look at the tools that have been proven to be effective, the methodology that have been, effective in educational setting, the ecological systems change, like what is working, what is natural to the development, and also looking at very focused supports based on students and individual needs, right? There's been a big shift from program-centered value systems to person-centered, meaning we want to identify skills that are going to improve the quality of life of our students. And we're teaching skills using various strategies until they're mastered, right? And if we think about, these stages of learning, acquisition of skills, and then using strategies to promote mastery and fluency of these skills so that they can then generalize them to other new untrained settings and maintain those long after they're gone from our classrooms. It makes sense that we're using evidence-based strategies that are not only promoting academics, communication, play skills, social skills, and all those things, but we're also using strategies and interventions that are minimizing problem behaviors. Because if you have problem behaviors, they're going to impede the teaching and learning process. So what does ABA in the classroom look like, right? We've reviewed how problem behavior can be shaped by consequences. So, and that requires really the identification of the function of that behavior, right? Consequences, by and large, have the most influence on shaping behavior. That, again, requires understanding what the function of the behavior is. So let's take a look at some more antecedent strategies that we can proactively put in place to prevent the potential problem behavior from occurring, because consequences, again, consequent strategies require really understanding the function of behavior, which requires, an advanced understanding of that. So we'll wrap up with how, you can look at more consequent strategies, but I think it's important to really understand also that you can prevent a lot of problem behaviors from even happening. So errorless learning is a procedure that reduces the chance of incorrect responses, right? We're using prompts and prompt fading to reduce incorrect responses. So you provide an instruction, a demand, and you deliver the correct response as a prompt so that your student responds, right? They engage in the behavior by echoing what you just told them to do, right? You eventually fade your prompts so that they don't become dependent on you giving them the answer. But the goal here with errorless learning is, again, reducing the number of incorrect responses that they're giving. There are tons of videos on the internet that demonstrate how errorless learning can be delivered when working with students. This is a really great strategy, especially when you're teaching students brand new concepts or skills. It reduces frustration tremendously. As I mentioned with errorless learning, you are using prompts, right? You're delivering prompts to increase the effectiveness of teaching by decreasing the likelihood of incorrect prompts. So there are different types of prompts. We have visual prompts, verbal prompts, physical prompts. It's, again, another strategy that is used to promote not just correct responding, but success, right? You're allowing your student to engage in the response or the behavior that you're targeting, but while minimizing the frustration that comes with engaging in the behavior that they don't know how to do, right? Feeling inadequate. So you can provide some visual prompting in the form of modeling, right? Demonstrating what's expected, what that behavior should look like. Again, you're minimizing frustration in doing things incorrectly, but you're also potentially minimizing confusion, especially when there's multi-step directions given. Think about those students that have, language deficits who struggle with understanding or comprehending and processing information. And you can use this sort of model here, right? Here's what is expected. Here are the instructions. I'm going to show you what to do, how it looks like. And then we're going to practice. You're going to practice with me. We're going to rehearse it. I'm going to give you feedback. I'm going to help you reach the point where you are going to be able to do this thing on your own. This is so important when we are targeting appropriate behaviors to replace those problem behaviors, right? If they've been engaging in a problem behavior for so long and getting what they want, it's been reinforced, and you're no longer going to reinforce that problem behavior, you need to teach the appropriate behavior to get that need met. But they may not know it, or they may not have it, or they may not understand it, or they may be reluctant because it's hard, right? Throwing yourself on the floor and screaming to get what you want is a lot easier than learning to use your words or use your communication system. So using this model here can promote that sense of, I can do it, right? That sense of capacity and capability. You also want to fade your prompts, right? You don't want your students to be dependent on you. This is a hierarchy of prompting, going from least to most intrusive. Some suggestions here is you want to begin fading your level of prompting when they are correctly responding about an average of 80%. So depending on where you are, your prompt delivery, if you're only doing modeling at this point, then you're going to go to gestural when they're averaging 80%. And then you're going to start to delay that level of prompting. If you see some incorrect responding, 2 to 3, return back to the most successful prompt level and maybe provide some more strategies to help promote the correct response. Discrete trial training is very specific. It's it's a very structured way of teaching using that ABC contingency that we've been talking about, right? The presentation of materials, the instructions, these are all antecedents, allowing some prompting to promote the response, and then you reinforce, right? Delivery of consequences. It's very specific. It does require more one-on-one. It's consistent. It's uninterrupted. You have the student's attention. It's a very distinct, clear process. This does require some training. Again, videos on this, but more preferably, you want to be trained by a behavior specialist who understands how to deliver this in a very quick, efficient manner. Direct instruction emphasizes teacher-student communication. So this really puts sort of everything together, right? The teacher's following a very specific script, is guided to how to respond to the student, whether they're correct or incorrect. And it is, again, very structured so that it is promoting communication with the student. It maximizes the effectiveness of the limited time that you have with your students, because direct instruction can be used as a whole group, with your students, not just one-on-one like discrete trials. And the research has demonstrated that it is it's fundamentally inclusive of all your students, and it is optimistic. The DI process isn't leaving students to their own devices, right? It's constructed in a way that it aims for mastery of academic content. Shaping. This is a procedure that is used to establish a behavior that is actually not present by the individual. They're not engaging in this behavior yet. So you're teaching them little steps to learn a new behavior, right? Your ultimate goal is this. We're going to teach you how to get there by shaping up and reinforcing. All of these little steps are going to get you to that ultimate step. And then self-monitoring allows for students who already have a behavior in their repertoire to self-assess and self-evaluate. This does require a lot of training and a lot of co-monitoring by you as a teacher, but is really effective for students of all ages. When you're identifying a very specific target skill or skills, there could be 1, 2, 3 skills that they're monitoring, and holding students, accountable for themselves. There are some guidelines there, right? You want to, make sure that the materials make it easy, right? The training that you've provided has set this up. That there are cues or prompts provided as needed, and again, you're teaching your students this. You're providing monitoring early and often, and you're reinforcing the student's ability to accurately self-monitor. Again, this requires the identification of target behaviors, very specifically a self-monitoring system that works well for your individual, and choosing reinforcers that are going to be motivating for your student, as well as very specific for how they're going to earn them and how they're going to use the system. And eventually the role of the teacher or the adult helping this is they fade out. Another skill, right, that they can then take and promote independence as they get older. So you have your target behaviors identified. You have some possible functions for behavior identified. If you're targeting a behavior for decrease, then you want to identify an appropriate behavior to replace it with based on the function that you're hypothesizing. And you've identified some potential reinforcers. So what's next? Create an action plan, right? Put it all together. Reinforce that the appropriate replacement behavior. It, again, likely may require teaching that replacement behavior, using one or more of those strategies, right? Instruction, modeling, feedback, or rehearsal and feedback, prompting, modeling, all of that. But you want to, again, provide opportunities for your student to be successful in attempting this new behavior that needs to have access to a very powerful reinforcer that's going to motivate them to continue engaging in this new behavior. You can connect with your behavior tech person at your school to help, create some more individualized planning for this, or you can contact a support specialist at CARD for more individualized support. So thank you so much for attending this webinar, and if you need to contact your clinical support specialist, here is the contact information. Thank you again for attending.